What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and as you can see, I've got a new look going on right now. Leave some feedback down below with anything you see that you like or don't like, or that maybe I can improve upon. I do plan on making it a bit more dynamic and colorful in the background though, so already got you covered on that bit. Anyway, Scythe reached out to me recently and asked if I wanted to take a look at their Fuma 2 heatsink. This is a follow-up on the Fuma Rev B that I took a look at along with several other Scythe products a little ways back in the channel, and I found that while the original Fuma B was an okay heatsink, the Mugen 5 Rev B, which actually ran a bit less expensive than that heatsink, turned out to be a bit better value, and for just the investment of an additional fan, actually outperformed it. So we're going to take a look at the Fuma 2 to see what comes in the box first of all, and how they've improved upon it in terms of performance, aesthetics, the high precision mounting system, and compare it to some of the other heatsink that I have on hand to see if maybe this is something you should be considering for your build. All right, so what you're seeing here is everything that comes in the box with the Fuma 2. By the way, immediately regretting buying a white table. So anyway, let's get all this stuff out of the way. Installation guide, of course. This does the job pretty well. It goes over the installation directions for all the relevant sockets, which is any of the mainstream Intel sockets, Intel's HEDT platform, as well as AM3+, AM4, etc. The only socket this isn't compatible with is your TR4/TRX40. Now this right here is all part of your Intel mounting hardware. Back plate to allow the heatsink to mount to the motherboard, a little rubber pad to go between this back plate and the motherboard, just to give you a little bit more insurance for avoiding shorting out any surface mounted devices. And then right here is sort of the core of the mounting system for the AMD socket, AM4, which I did all of my testing with for this video. We've got these two brackets right here that mount on the top and the bottom of the socket respectively, with these four sleeves being between these brackets and the back plate. These bearings are a far better design than the HPMS2 system that this replaces. This is HPMS3, which is a high precision mounting system. And basically the design of these sleeves is such that they will actually hold on to the CPU backplate, which makes installation of all the other components for the mounting system a hell of a lot easier than the previous generation. This was actually extremely easy to set up and install. Now along the lines of installation is this long shank screwdriver that we get. This is the third one that I've gotten with Scythe products. This is a really nice add. I'm glad to see this here because it was not in the box with the Fuma Rev B, and that was a heatsink that definitely could have benefited from having this, so I'm glad to see it included in this kit. And as an aside, that screwdriver does have a magnetic tip. We then of course have our two-fan fan splitter to make sure that we can run both of our heatsink fans off of the same CPU fan header. We also have some extra mounting clips for a standard 25mm thick fan. That is an important distinction to make with these, as I will get into when we start talking about the heatsink itself. Then we have this thermal paste that Scythe provides. I did not use this for my testing, but I am extremely disappointed with the packaging here. Not because it's poor packaging. This feels every bit as good as any of the other tubes of thermal paste that you've ever gotten, but it only has like one or two applications worth of paste on the inside of it. That feels like an excessive use of plastic for not a whole lot of paste. Honestly, I would rather have seen this exact compound in a much smaller package. It's just, this is wasteful, is all. Now let's get to the heart of the matter, the heatsink itself. So, dimensionally, this is a bit larger than the Fuma 2 that it's replacing, and it does have some very significant design changes that were made to give this maximum compatibility and maximum ease of installation. So as we can see right here, one of the major changes with this heatsink to go along with the enhanced overall dimensions is the fact that these fin stacks are offset towards the rear I/O of the motherboard, which gives it a bit more compatibility with your mainstream sockets. And then on the opposite fin stack, the one that's a bit girthier, if you will, there's actually about 7 fins at the bottom that are notched out to give you a bit more height clearance in the event you're using like an Intel HEDT platform for RAM on the opposite side of the CPU socket. Now, the way I have this set up right now is in its typical dual fan configuration. You could, of course, run this with a single fan if you were running like a really low wattage CPU or something like that, but this does come with 2 fans. They are both 120mm fans, but while one is a standard thickness Kazeflex 120 that they do sell individually, and they're a really good price for the performance that they offer as well as their relative noise levels, the second fan is a slim model measuring 17mm thick at the widest point, which would be the rubber stoppers in the corners. The reason they opted to go this route is twofold. One, the slim fan on a fin stack that's already offset towards the rear of the motherboard means that you can guaranteed run all 4 DIMMs populated with some extremely tall RAM. And my computer is using a 4x8 GB kit of G.SKILL TRIDENT Z. This fits like a glove with 0 interference with the RAM. Now, one of the main differences, other than the thickness of these 2 fans between these two, is the fact that the thinner fan rotates in the opposite direction of the thicker fan here. Now, on the box, they use language that I'm not entirely sure that I agree with, but again, I'm not a thermodynamics major, so it's not really something that I can truly comment on, but they talk about these 2 fans rotating opposite directions of one another, enabling essentially better airflow across these fin stacks here. Now, whether or not that's actually the case, I can't validate that. I don't have the proper equipment to do that. But according to the performance data that we'll see later, it definitely didn't hurt. Now, another thing that's not as readily apparent with this particular design is these little notches right here in the thinner fin stack. These notches are here so that you can take this long shank screwdriver that they supply you with and reach right down the fin stack into the fasteners that hold the heatsink to the mounting brackets near the motherboard. This is an awesome design choice, and it basically allows you to install this heatsink as a fully assembled unit with the fans on it, and you're not going to worry about this colliding with anything else in your system or have any other conflict issues apart from whether or not your tower is designed to house the height of the heatsink, which in this case is actually going to be as advertised because these fans do not need to typically lift up taller than the tips of the heat pipes up here. So I'm really liking what they've done with the improvements to the HPMS system here. But as you and I both know, at the end of the day, a heatsink still has to prove itself. Okay, so now that we've seen what comes in the box here and taken a closer look at the heatsink and how these changes are sort of manifested between the Fuma 2 and the Fuma B in use, I can tell you that this heatsink infinitely easier to install because those little plastic bearings actually grip onto your CPU backplate for an AM4 socket motherboard. Makes it really easy and fast for me to mount everything that I need to get this attached to the motherboard, which means I can get up and running a lot faster. Now, aesthetically speaking, it's gonna be a love it or hate it kind of thing either way, but I feel like the black anodized plate that's on the top of each of the fin stacks on the Fuma 2 is gonna look a lot nicer in your computer versus that polished top fin on the Fuma Revision B. And while I didn't do any performance testing with them, Scythe did also send over some of their RGB fans for me to take a look at on this heatsink. The main things that I will note with the fans are, while the specs are going to be comparable between their non-RGB brethren, they do have the additional cable that comes off of them to daisy chain together for multiple fans in a system. They are 12-volt RGB, which means they are not addressable. You don't get all of the fancier lighting effects that you get from something like RGB Fusion or AURUS or something like that. And I will say that the white tends to veer more towards the bluish green end of the spectrum versus the rest of the white lighting in my daily driver rig, which veers slightly red. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to see an RGB skew for this heatsink, because they do have one for the Mugen 5 now. Anyway, to really quickly touch on the testing system before we start talking results here, the platform that was used was the GIGABYTE AORUS X470 Gaming 7 Wi-Fi motherboard alongside 32 gigabytes of G.SKILL TRIDENT Z DIMMs at 3200 megahertz, and the processor that we were using is a RYZEN 7 3700X with PBO and XFR enabled. For further details on the testing platform and my methodology, check the video's description below. All right, so what you should be seeing on the screen right now is all the performance data that I took in testing all of these heat sinks. I am working on getting a more visually appealing version of this, but due to time constraints, this is what I can throw on the screen for you right now, but I think you'll all be all right. Average boost clock frequency between these heat sinks didn't actually waver as much as I thought it would, with the minimum across all 8 cores and 16 threads being on the Wraith Prism at 4.075 gigahertz, and boost clocks on the Fuma heat sinks, as well as the Corsair H100 IV1, RIP, hitting about 4.125 gigahertz. Our temperature deltas on the Wraith Prism, of course, weren't spectacular here, but I don't think anyone was expecting them to be. Rather, that should act as your sort of baseline when looking at the rest of the numbers here to see where the best value really lies with these heat sinks. And critically, when we look at the Fuma 2 versus the Revision B, we're seeing that with one fan being thinner and both fans running at lower RPM, it actually beats out the Revision B by a few degrees Celsius, which is admittedly really nice. It just makes for an overall quieter, cooler experience in general. And then when we're comparing the Fuma 2 to the Corsair H100 IV1, we're not really seeing a massive temperature swing between the two of them, and relative to the pricing of current 240mm all-in-one solutions, the Fuma 2, in my assessment, provides a much stronger value, and depending on your case environment, can provide for an easier installation process. Now, obviously the Mugen 5, according to this data, did not perform quite as well as it did when I took a look at it previously. Admittedly, I was using a different case environment with a different fan configuration, and in the future, I will be trying to source a dedicated static heatsink testing environment to avoid variables like this in the future. But since one of these heatsinks was going to go into my daily driver rig anyway, that's the configuration I use, so deal with it. So in short, the Fuma 2 runs quieter, it runs cooler, and it installs easier than its predecessor. So let's talk total conclusion then. So it's conclusion time on the Fuma 2, and as you probably gathered from the way I was discussing this heatsink, this is kind of a winner in my book. It's improved upon the Fuma Revision B in every way that mattered critically. Installation process is a lot easier. It's a lot more user-friendly. The offset design maximizes capability with taller heat spreaders. I mean, I've got 4 of some of the tallest heat spreaders on the market right now, short of something like the Corsair Dominator Platinums, and this cleared them with no issue whatsoever. It also runs significantly quieter than the Fuma Revision B, which came with sleeve bearing fans that ran 200 RPM higher than these fluid dynamic bearing fans, and they had this really coarse sound to them that, while unfortunately I don't have a proper testing environment to really pick up sounds like that just yet, it was this odd buzzing noise that both of the fans exhibited. So it wasn't like it was a manufacturing variance issue or anything like that. It just was a less refined fan. Everything about this heatsink is improved, and honestly, when you're looking at the $60 price point here versus something like a typical 240mm all-in-one solution that's gonna run you about $100 or so for a decent one, this actually looks really appealing, especially if you're mounting this computer in a system like mine, where I don't want a whole lot of sound coming from it. I would rather be listening to what it is I'm editing on the screen in front of me. And even under full load, this thing barely makes any noise at all. Honestly, the GPU fans on my RTX 2070 Gaming Z are louder than this thing. And while unfortunately I was not able to compare this against other similarly priced solutions in the market, I can say that at least from my test samples today and from my basic perspective of what I've used in recent history, The Fuma 2 looks like a solid bet. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up to this one. Huge thank you to Scythe for sending out this heatsink for review. I'm really glad that there were a lot of key improvements made here, especially that screwdriver being included and being a part of the mounting system now. It's apparent they listened to the criticisms of reviewers like myself who took a look at this heatsink in the past and noticed that there was a lot to improve upon. And man, did they improve upon it. Great job, guys. Anyway, toss the video a thumbs up if you liked what you saw, get subscribed and hit that bell icon for more content. And as always, I'll catch you guys next time. So take it easy.